At the beginning of next quarter, which is the beginning of next year, I will be starting to preach on the book of John. And I thought, why not give a little bit of a kind of a teaser for that and talk about a subject from the book of John this evening. I wanted to talk about the 7 miracles of Jesus that are found in the book of John. John has a focus, and John has a purpose for writing that he states at the end of the book. He says, Jesus did many other things other than the things I wrote in this book, but I wrote these things that you may believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And so in this focus, he chooses only 7 of the miracles that Jesus did in his time on earth, not including, of course, the resurrection. The other gospel accounts record many more miracles. And yet with this focus, John, I think, kind of perfectly captures Jesus and who he is, and really Jesus' power in these miracles. And this evening, I simply want to read over the text of these miracles and look at each miracle one by one and make some application at the end, what we see from Jesus at the end. So the first miracle that we find is in John chapter 2. John chapter 2. And as far as we know, this is the first miracle that Jesus ever did that was recorded for us. As far as in his ministry and just the timeline of things, I believe that this is the first miracle that we see. And in John chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, "On the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' And Jesus said to her, 'Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come.' His mother said to the servants, 'Whatever he says to you, do it.' Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, 'Fill the water pots with water.' So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, 'Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter.' So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, 'Every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have kept the good wine until now.' This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." So the first one that we see here is water to wine. And let me mute the PowerPoint for just a moment. But the first miracle that we see is water to wine. And it is a show of the power of Jesus really for the first time to his disciples. I do kind of find it difficult to believe that Jesus has not done anything remarkable up until this point. But what I do find is that there is an interesting quality to Jesus' miracle here that the disciples see for themselves, and it says that they believe. They believed in Jesus because of what he did here. And so this kind of starts off as a basis for believing in Jesus. The next miracle that we see is in John chapter 4. Now, John focuses, his timeline kind of focuses on 3 Passovers, kind of a way to chart the 3 years of Jesus. And this was sometime after the first Passover. We're not sure exactly how long. But Jesus had also been in Samaria at this time, and now he is back in Galilee. And in verse 46, it says, "Therefore he came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and was imploring him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe." The royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started off. As he was going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son was living. So he inquired of them the hour when he began to get better. Then they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at that hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives." And he himself believed, and his whole household. This is again a second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea and to Galilee. Now, I want you to notice what Jesus says here, because it's kind of an important idea as you go through the book of John and you see these miracles. John wrote at the end that these miracles were written that you may believe. And we saw that in the first in the first miracle, that his disciples believed, and perhaps those who had drawn the water, that they also believed. But not really a lot of belief stirred up by that one particular miracle. Well, Jesus comes to Galilee where he had been walking for some time, and the people knew him, and yet Jesus says to them in a kind of chiding manner, it seems, he says, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you're not going to believe." He seems to be condemning their lack of belief. But to this official, he is imploring that Jesus come down and heal his son. It seems like he knows that Jesus has the power to heal his son. But Jesus doesn't come down. He seemingly tests this official's faith a little bit. And he says, "Go." To the official's credit, the official, when Jesus says, "Go, your son is healed," he believes him. And so the official goes. And without Jesus having ever been there, the slaves run out and say, "Your son is healed, everything is okay." And the nobleman knows that it was from the time that Jesus said it. And he and his household believe. And John mentions a second sign. This is the second sign that Jesus did. So we see belief kind of being built up a little bit, but then again, not much. It wasn't like great crowds or great multitudes are believing in him at this point, but a royal official, a nobleman, and his household believe in Jesus. Then Jesus goes up to Jerusalem once more. There was a feast of the Jews, although I do not believe that this is talking about the Passover. But there's a feast of the Jews, and Jesus goes up to Jerusalem. In chapter 5 and verse 1. After these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in, was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. A man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in a long time in that condition, he said, "Do you wish to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet, and walk." Immediately, the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. Now it was the Sabbath on that day. So Jesus is in a more public setting at this point. Yes, in Galilee he was in public and people were imploring him, but the actual healing, not everybody saw that. Just the nobleman's slaves saw that the son was made well. But here he's at a pool where people are lying around, and there's this kind of strange phenomenon that we don't see today. We don't have angels stirring up pools, but apparently in this time there's an angel stirring up this pool, and whoever steps in first is made well when the angel stirs up the pool. But there's this lame man, this man who had been ill for 38 years, for a very, very long time. And Jesus, in this public place, heals this man. He says, "Pick up your pallet and walk." And it wasn't just in a public place, but it was also on the Sabbath. And Jesus is going to get in a little bit of controversy with the Jews, the Pharisees, after this. But you notice Jesus is a little bit more public in this particular miracle. Well, time goes on, and Jesus begins to grow quite the following. And that's where we read of the next miracle that John records in chapter 6. John chapter 6 and verse 1. After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. A large crowd followed him, because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are these for so many people?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down and number about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated, likewise also the fish as much as they wanted. When they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, so that nothing will be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." So Jesus has gained quite the following. He has become very popular. And all these people are following him. In other gospel accounts, it says that Jesus had compassion upon them at this point. He doesn't want to send them away without feeding them. And he's also testing his disciples. He says, where are we to get food for this many people? And they say, "We have no clue." We have no idea, Jesus. It was the wrong answer by the disciples. They should have known, based on what we've seen, that Jesus could handle the situation, but they don't seem to get that. Jesus has them seat the people. 5,000 men, could be 10,000, it could be somewhere less than that, it could be 15,000. Who knows how many people are here? It says 5,000 men, though. We know at least that many. And Jesus takes 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and probably not sizable fish, by the way. That seems to be indicated in the word that's used there for fish. And he feeds over 5,000 people. And when they were done picking up the leftovers, they had a lot of leftovers, 12 baskets with fragments. And the people see this, and they believe in him. They say, "This is truly the prophet who has come into the world, referencing Deuteronomy 18:15, that promised that there would come a prophet like Moses who would lead the people. And that these people believed that prophet would be the Messiah. They're essentially acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah at this point. Well, seemingly that night, Jesus performs another miracle in the presence of only his close few disciples. In verse 15 it says, "So Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea began to be stirred up, because a strong wind was blowing. Then, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, 'It is I, do not be afraid.' So they were willing to receive him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going." So Jesus has withdrawn from the crowd because they want to make him king, and a physical king at that. That's not what Jesus wants. That's not his purpose for being on earth. And he withdraws to the mountain. But he sends the disciples across the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus had not met up with them. I assume they think that Jesus is going to row a boat to meet up with them that way. But the sea becomes boisterous, as the Sea of Galilee often does. And they're having trouble. They're in a lot of trouble, in fact. They're straining to row, and they're frightened, but they see Jesus walking on the water. And they become even more frightened at that point, thinking that he's some kind of spirit or ghost, or they don't know. I mean, if you saw a figure on the water in the dark, what would you think? But Jesus says to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." In other gospel accounts of this miracle, the disciples are perplexed. They're wondering, marveling, what kind of person is this? I believe it's in the gospel account of Mark that they had not gained understanding because of the loaves. But Jesus does this for his disciples' sake, for them to see. He was testing them in the miracle of the 5,000, and that was for them as much as it was for the people, perhaps even more so. But they still had not gained understanding at this point. They still didn't understand what they needed to know about Jesus. And so he does this as well. But even then, I'm not sure that they fully get it at this point. Well, the rest of chapter 6, Jesus gets into controversy with a lot of the people that he had just fed the previous day, and ends up running off a lot of the people who were following him, to the point where Jesus said to his disciples, "Do you want to go away also?" And they did not. But there is a time of Jesus kind of drawing himself back in a little bit and withdrawing from these large crowds, his popularity, and this is leading up to Jesus' death. But we do see another miracle that he performs in broad daylight and in a very public fashion in John chapter 9. John chapter 9, Jesus is once again in Jerusalem. And he's already kind of had controversy with the Jews, and the Jews have been looking for him, wanting to stone him. But as he passed by, going out of the temple, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he applied the clay to his eyes, and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. So Jesus heals this blind man in Jerusalem while he's got a target on his back. And the rest of chapter 9 deals, and really chapter 10 as well, deals with the fallout from that. The Pharisees don't believe that Jesus has healed this man, and they call him into question. And there's just this big controversy over whether Jesus actually did this. But he did. He healed this blind man. And Jesus is showing the world, showing the Jews, showing his disciples that they can believe in him, that he truly is the Son of God. I want you to notice what it says in John chapter 10. In John chapter 10, he says in verse 35, he's quoting a psalm, and he said, if he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him who the Father sanctified and sent into the world, you are blaspheming, because I said, I am the Son of God? If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do them, though you do not believe me, believe the works, so that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father. Now it says in verse 39, they were seeking to seize him, and he eluded their grasp. But notice what it says in verse 42. Many believed in him there. He went away to the Jordan, kind of secluded himself, but many were believing in him there because they saw the signs and wonders which he was performing. And that leads into chapter 11. Jesus is away at the Jordan, spending some time there. But Lazarus of Bethany becomes sick. And Jesus delays for a little while, but eventually he goes. By the time that Jesus gets there, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. And in verse 38, it says, so Jesus, again being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The man who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. This is the last miracle that John captures in his gospel. Again, not counting Jesus' own resurrection. But notice what Jesus affirms once again. It's throughout the book of John that this is said and that John affirms. It's for the purpose of belief. And that God is glorified. He's doing the things that God sent him to do. But Lazarus has been dead, and in front of all these people, it seems like Mary and Martha and Lazarus were well loved among the people of Bethany. There was a crowd, there were mourners, there were people who were trying to comfort them at this difficult time when Lazarus died. And all these people, in front of all these people, Jesus raises a dead man. A man who had been dead for 4 days. And he says, Lazarus, come forth, and Lazarus lives. And even his enemies couldn't deny what Jesus had done. So again, this is kind of just to give you a taste for the book of John when we get there. And I don't want to, overplay my hand and start breaking down all of these miracles too much, because when we get there, we'll talk about them more. But I do want to think about this. What do all these miracles show about Jesus? Specifically, about his power. Think about what Jesus demonstrated his power over in these 7 miracles that we have seen and read this evening. He demonstrated power over matter. He did that with changing water into wine. He did that with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. You could argue he did that also with walking on water. Jesus demonstrated power over space. He didn't even have to be in the same room, in the same, you could say, vicinity as the nobleman's son. He just said, go, your son is healed. And the nobleman went, and so it was. Jesus demonstrated power over disease and disability with the lame man and the blind man. Even when the lame man had been lame for 38 years, and the blind man, we don't know how old he was. It seems like he was younger than that, but he had been blind his entire life. That was no match for Jesus and the power that he showed. Jesus demonstrated power over nature. Not only was he walking on water, but he was walking on the sea when the sea was boisterous. And I cannot remember if when we read it, if it said this in this gospel, but if it didn't, in another gospel it says, when he got into the boat, the sea was immediately calm. In this gospel it said that they had gotten to the other side as well, but the sea just calmed automatically. So Jesus demonstrated his power over nature. And Jesus demonstrated his power over death. Not just once, with the raising of Lazarus, but ultimately, most importantly, when he died and he was resurrected on the 3rd day. What an amazing God that we serve. And when we look at Jesus, this man from Nazareth, who claimed extraordinary things in this gospel and the other gospels, he claimed to be the Son of God. He claimed to be the Messiah. He claimed equality with God. He claimed to be the I Am. But he backed it up. Over and over and over again. In front of a few witnesses, in front of many witnesses, and ultimately for the whole world to decide what they're going to do with him. Because the message of his resurrection has gone out to the whole entire world. And it's been that way for a long time. The whole world knows the claims about Jesus and the power that he showed. And now we have to decide what we're going to do with him. Are we going to believe as these things were recorded for us to do? Will we believe in him? Or will we be like so many others and ignore everything that's right in front of our face and say, I don't want anything to do with him? This evening you have that choice as well. Maybe you're not a Christian. Maybe you have an opportunity this evening to obey the gospel. You should do that. believing in Him, repenting of your sins, confessing before men, and being baptized for the remission of sins, to live faithfully and walk in newness of life the rest of your days. If you are a Christian, perhaps you have turned away from serving Him, deserted Him as a disciple, come back. He will forgive you, and He will take you into His fold once more. If you need to make that decision tonight, won't you come while we stand and sing?